Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Conversing with CJ, episode 2. And we're joined by a very special guest. And I'll say that with every episode because every guest that I have on this podcast has a story worth hearing. And this guest is no exception. She spent 17 years in the RAF, 2 tours of Iraq, and 10 tours, if I'm not mistaken, of Afghanistan, which is unheard of from my perspective. Her name is Liz McConaghy, author of the memoir Chinook Crew Chick. Thank you very much for joining me today. And how's your day been so far, Liz?
Oh, thank you for the intro, CJ. And it's quite a mouthful, isn't it? Having not only my surname, but also the title of the book, Chinook Crew Chick. Not easy today.
Yep.
No, I'm really good. I'm obviously chatting to you from London or near London, and we're having a huge heat wave over here at the minute. So it's currently 33 degrees. So
We're a polar opposite here. I've got about 4 or 5 degrees here at the moment. As people can see, I'm wearing a beanie and a flannelette shirt with a shirt underneath. Yeah, chalk and cheese. My first question for you, Liz, is the first question that you should always start with when it comes to a life story. What was your childhood and upbringing like?
Do you know what? It was really good. I think sometimes you hear people who end up with the sort of mental health crisis where I got to, which I'm sure we'll come on to, and people sort
Mm-hmm.
of delve into that and think, oh, it must have been because of an upbringing or something like that. But
Or it's like, oh,
um,
that makes sense, sort of thing.
yeah, exactly. But no, I had a brilliant upbringing. I grew up in Northern Ireland. If you hadn't already figured out from my accent, I grew up in the countryside there, and I had an older brother, and we used to like disappear off in the countryside, like you could do in those days. You could disappear off at 9 o'clock in the morning, your little backpack on, and your sandwiches in the back, and a packet of crisps, and we go off and play and disappear off. And again, we weren't both went to the same school and kind of mirrored each other through that. So I had a really lucky upbringing. I went to a grammar school, which was very much. I don't know if you guys have the equivalent over in Australia, but grammar schools are kind of slightly kind of higher up in terms of education level, I
Yes.
guess, in terms
Yep.
of perception, and then just a normal high school. And
Like
therefore,
you're
I was
expected
very,
to go to university, sort of thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then obviously I didn't go to uni. I joined the RAF. So that kind of grammar school upbringing was a good, solid foundation. But towards the latter end of it, I felt like they didn't really understand what was out there for people in terms of career choices that didn't involve a degree. So yeah.
No, that's fair enough. And that tangents into my next question. Did you do well at school, even though you had no intention or aspirations to go to university? The pressure was on. Did you do well in your exams? What sort of student were you?
Yeah, I think I was very studious up until about the age of 17. I did like 13 GCSEs and I had some really wacky ones in there. I did Latin and I did archaeology. I think I kind of grew up watching the Indiana Jones films and just really
Yep.
wanted to be an archaeologist. And I did geology as well. So I was like a real rock collector geek girl. And then kind of from about the age of 16, 17, when I've completed my GCSEs as we have over here and was doing my A levels, I think that's when I started to lose a bit of interest in them. And I'd done the classic thing where I had followed everyone else's advice of what to do instead of following my
We've
gut
all
and
been
my
there.
heart, what I wanted to do. So instead of picking three subjects that I was really passionate about, the rocks and Latin and things like that, I kind of did the sciences and I think that's where things started to crumble because I think if I'd have just followed my heart a bit more, I probably would have done better in my levels. Like I think I got a D, an A, and an F. So I sat them all, but I wouldn't say I was sparkling in terms of results. But by that point, I already had zoomed in on my military career and had been accepted into the RAF as well before I'd even started my A levels. So it was incredibly difficult to keep the motivation to keep being studious when I knew that I already had my big dream job kind of waiting for
Yeah.
me. So yeah.
Flowing into that perfectly, what was your first exposure to the RAF and military in general? Because you just alluded that you had it all ready to go before your GCSEs had even begun. What was your first experience?
It was so random. So I had no military background whatsoever. I didn't have a history of parents and grandparents and stuff in the military. I had no mates in the military at that age, and we had a big cadet force at our school, like a huge cadet force actually. They were very famous in Northern Ireland. And I wasn't a cadet either because I played hockey and you couldn't do both. You didn't have time. So I really had there was no sort of background that was feeding me and fueling me towards the military. But what did happen was my older brother was really keen on the army and he went up to a place back home to do his entrance test. And I went
Mm-hmm.
with him. I saw a magazine on the table and the magazine had a guy hanging out the side of a helicopter. And I just went, that's what I want to do.
Was it a
And kind of
Chinook
did
in particular, or was it a regular helicopter?
no, it was actually a search and rescue helicopter at the time, and I thought that he was hanging out on a piece of rope. And I said to the guys, is this guy on the rope? What's the job? And he said, well, it's a wire. and the job title is helicopter crewman. And I kind of look back then and think, I suffer really badly as an adult with imposter syndrome, which we can maybe talk about later. But I look back at my 16, 17-year-old self, and I'm really proud that not only did the fact that I had no military background to put me off, I also didn't live in England where the RAF were based, put me off, but the job title was crewman. And I just went, well, can women do it? And they said, yeah. And I said, what's the worst can happen? We have a saying in the military, which is always quite funny, which is, it won't kill you and it can't make you pregnant. Now, obviously, I didn't think that at the time.
I love that saying.
But it's such, I live and die by that saying now. I think sometimes we let ourselves hold ourselves back too much just for that fear of failure. And again, I look back at my 17-year-old self. I was so proud of myself for just going, what's the worst can happen? Let's give it a go. So I had to do some interviews back there. I then came across to England to do some aptitude tests, which all aircrew have to do. And it's like speed, distance, time calculations. It's like basically a posh computer game, and the screen will go blue and you have to press the blue button. So it's all reactive stuff as well. It's remembering big long sequences of numbers and maybe some piloty type stuff like keep the ball in the middle. And basically what they're doing is checking your aptitude for a variety of roles. So from like fast jet, Red Arrow number 1, through to air trafficker, some of the other like rear crew roles that they do in the military, like signalers and some of the fixed wing platforms, and then crewmen as well, and very much crewmen and navigators, but very much crewman job, or like it's a practical job where like the people that just get the stuff done down the back. And I think whatever my aptitude results, they absolutely solidified that was going to be a good job for me. So, and then a fitness test and a medical, and was very lucky, managed to pass all that, and then basically came across my 19th birthday, and that was me. Moved to England, say goodbye to Northern Ireland, and kind of the rest was history.
Oh, absolutely. And we're going to dive into that history in a moment. But in your book, Chinook Crew Chick, you actually also got qualified from that aptitude stuff for navigator, but your arms were like 2 centimeters too short. Talk us through finding that out.
I know. So again, I think when I was sort of going through all that, I was so startled. Like I was a bunny in the headlights. I was from Northern Ireland. I had very little exposure to the military, like I said. So everything was like just, they're pumping information at you, and it's really hard to take it all in when you're that age. So I think it really wouldn't have mattered if they'd have said, oh, by the way, do you want to be a navigator? Do you want to be an air electronics operator, which was the other roles that we could do? Or, do you want to be the first ever Red Arrow in that's a direct entrance? But I just want to be a crewman. I was like, that's not the same job. No, I want to be this person. So it kind of didn't really matter. I was so focused on.
You had that tunnel vision for crewmen.
Yeah. And that we call them rock stars because you guys have got chilies over there anyway, but I think they're a bit further away from where you're based. But I think, just seeing people in helicopters, it's a cool job. People hanging off the ramp, people hanging out the doors and things like that. And
even the non-military ones that are, rescuing people, it's absolutely awe-inspiring is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was just mad focused on that. And I think that's I think that because I didn't really have a backup plan, and that was just that the end goal was that actual focus is what got me through a lot of the challenges that then subsequently came during basic training. Because that saying failure isn't an option. I literally didn't have a backup plan. I had no oh well, if I don't make it in the RAF, I'll go back and restart university and I just had no backup plan. There was nothing in Northern Ireland that really made me ever want to stay there. And Northern Ireland had its issues, obviously, and by 1996 the agreement had been signed, so things were settling down. But it's still my home country, but it's still very insular. Like everyone knows everyone's business. Once a year, there's still big riots and people burning cars and things. And I just thought there's got to be more to life than living here and everyone knowing everyone on your street and things like that. We only got a Starbucks there about, I don't know, 2001 or something. And, know, things like that. It was just a little bit behind. And I think I just always wanted to go and spread my wings. So going back home with my tail between my legs just wasn't an option.
Yeah, fair. And I totally understand and respect that. If you're going to do something, whether you have a backup plan or not, commit 100% to it. That's my, philosophy. Because even if you do fail, you can't be disappointed in yourself because you gave it your all, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And tangenting back into 2001, obviously a very big, worldwide incident occurred in 2001, 9/11. Now, obviously in your book, you allude to where you were, what you were doing at the time, which you were only a week away from basic training, more or less, at that point. So talk us through first of all finding out that it was happening and realizing, oh, pardon my language, shit, I'm going to basic training next week and this is kicking off.
Yeah. Well, I worked in a cafe in a leisure centre, and it was about a 10-15 minute drive from home. So I set off down the road and got in for my shift. I think it started at like 1 o'clock or something. And I came in the door, and literally, Margaret, who's one of the older ladies who was on shift, handed me the phone and went, Liz, your mum's on the phone. And the first thought I was, oh, what have I forgotten? Because I'd only just
Yeah.
left home. So I was like, what have I left behind? And she said, oh, you've got to go and put the TV on, Elizabeth. She calls me Elizabeth. It's my Sunday name. So I was like, what's going on? She goes, just go and put the TV on. And we had a TV in the corner of the cafe and like the kids' corner bit. So it's quiet. The cafe was really quiet. And we went, put the TV on and just stood there in awe as the second plane went in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think anyone knew what to make of it at that point. Because again, even if we all cast our minds back to that day, at that point, it wasn't so obvious this is a terror attack. But I think we
No,
all
it
knew that
wasn't.
something serious was happening. And Margaret just elbowed me and said, Liz, you're joining the military in a week. You're going to be a busy girl. And I think even at that point, I was only 17, or sorry, I was only 18, turning 19. I even don't think at that point I had the capacity to understand just how much that was true and how then that singular event shaped everything going forward. And I look back at the slice of time I had in the military from then, and I always refer to it as the golden era because I literally joined just at the right time to kind of catch
Mm.
all the good shit. And I think, I've got a lot of, even just as I was leaving the military many years later, there was a lot of guys and girls coming through training and we'd already pulled out about PERIC and things like that. And I thought, you're potentially going to have like a 20-year career and never go to war. There,
Mm.
obviously things have changed slightly in the last year or two and things are bubbling away. But I just think if you're going to join the military, and I'm not a kind of war junkie, but you do
No.
join to do a job. And it was really nice to then, a year and a half later, be out in Iraq and be doing that job.
Well, absolutely. And I watched a podcast the other day. I can't remember which one it was, but they hit the nail on the head when it comes to military. You join the military to do a job, and it's not that you look forward to combat or anything, because no one looks forward to combat. It's more the sense of you've trained for so many years or so many months at this point. You're at the peak of your skill, and you want to be tested in that skill and that skill set. If I'm not talking out of place for that, and I think unfortunately warfare is literally the biggest test for that. But talk about basic training, 12 weeks. And you're there in the book. You mentioned you're about 10 years younger than everyone else. And you're putting socks underneath your bra straps because you're getting bruising. Talk us through the entire, for lack of a better term, ordeal of basic training for you.
Honestly, whenever I got there, I didn't know my arse from my elbow. I was just like, what is going on? It was full saturation and max capacity of stuff being told to you and, learning the ranks and things like that. And again, because I didn't have the military background to kind of parachute off or jump off, I was learning everything from scratch. So the rank slides in the RAF over here are really rubbish because they're lines that the officers wear on their shoulders. So it's not easily distinguishable to go, oh, all you knew is the more lines, the bigger the rank, really, and salute a lot. So I just saluted everything really in the early days. But I think, all the drill we have to do in the parade square, keeping your bed space really tidy and having all the inspections and stuff like that. It's really easy when you're, I guess, going through that to go, but why? Like, why are they so hot on all this? Like, why do I have to iron my bed for an inspection? But the theory is, and I think it really does actually get ingrained in you going forward, is that if you can look after the simple things really well, like if you can keep your kit clean and iron your kit properly and put the lines in the right place, that attention to detail, and that's a word that gets bounded around in basic training, attention to detail. Because if you keep that attention to detail and that you don't skip skip corners or try and take the easy shortcut, then that will stand you in good stead no matter what job you go into the military, whether or not you do become a fast jet pilot, whether or not you become like an interpreter, whether or not, intelligence branch or aircrew like I did. It doesn't really matter. But whenever you're in the air, you can't cut corners. You can't go, oh, I'll faff around with these switches, or I'll do everything and I'll take the shortcut. You have to do everything the way it was supposed to be done. And that attention to detail is so important. So it sounds really silly to have it in terms of basic training on how you keep your bed space and your wardrobe and all those things, but it's to ingrain those values in you to then go forward and take them into the professional bit of the role. So I now understand that obviously many years later, but There was a lot of running. There was a lot of carrying pine poles around. They don't do that now. They put the pine poles in position for the young recruits, and it's always easy to sit back and look and go, "Oh, it was harder in my day," but it genuinely was. But I'm sure there's lots of people from, whenever I was going through would have said, "Oh, it was harder in my day 10 years ago." So we all have that, retrospective looking back. But it was tough. It was really tough. I wasn't particularly fit when I joined, and I had to really up my game in terms of fitness. And I had some brilliant people who got me through. I think that's the one thing from day one in the military is that you're one team, you fail or succeed together. Very often if, one person on the course was failing, we'd all get punished because it was like,
Yep.
well, actually the emphasis is on you guys to pull them through. So you're not doing your
Yep.
job either.
Because you're
So
only as strong as your weakest link.
exactly that. And I was definitely the weakest link. I was the young girl from Northern Ireland, did not know what was going on. But, everyone turns to the left on the parade square and I was going right type thing. But it was those people, that camaraderie. And again, that's been a constant throughout my career of those brothers and sisters in arms who are to the left and right of you, who will just get you through your toughest and darkest days, actually. And, coming back to that being tested and getting shot at, you really see people's true colors and true personality
Yes.
when their adrenaline's pumping and there's a genuine fear of death. And you see people's real rawness and there, because you see people stripped bare like that solidifies those friendships so much more. So you end up coming out the other side of it with literally family for life.
Yep. Absolutely, because you literally find out what people are made of, whether they are, no pun intended, fight or flight when it comes to, literal direct face with the enemy. It's incredible. During your time in basic training, what was the one exercise or drill instruction that you absolutely hated?
Oh, well, I was definitely not good at running. So every time we used to go for the squad runs and the PTs who are like the personal training instructors, they knew I was the weak link and they would pull out the biggest pine pole every time. And there was a couple of smaller ones, but they pulled out the biggest one and gave it to me. And again, I think everything's got a lesson in it and everything is there for a reason. And I look back and think,
Yep.
if I'd have been given the easy get out clause on terms of pine poles back then maybe that's what I expected for the rest of my career. If you show a bit of weakness, you get an easy route. So, and I was given the tougher route because I was showing weakness. And, that hardens you and I think firms you up a bit. So I think, the probably squad runs were pretty tough. And all of that kind of, just drill and all those kind of things on the parade square. I was just so rubbish at them all. And it's hard
That's
to
fair enough.
So, yeah.
Fair. And so after 12 weeks of basic training, which is more or less the mandatory standard for all military forces, from what I'm led to believe, it's 12 weeks here in Australia for our military. You are, you're in a room, you're getting told which ones are going to have to restart the course next week. And they say your name more or less. The names they mention are the ones that have to stay. And then they go, and the rest of you are graduating. Congratulations. How did you feel? You were probably expecting to hear your name called, but it wasn't. Talk us through the emotion when you found out you were, you've made it.
I couldn't believe it because the guy whose name they did call, the last name, was a really great guy, very fit. He was kind of like one of the guys on the course who was, just all over everything because he wanted to be or he was a personal trainer or something before he joined. So he was very, very fit. He'd already had a previous background in the military. But he was a gobshite, as we call them. So he was very gobby, a bit Larry, and had a tendency to answer back. And I think it was maybe that's why they recoursed him, because although he was absolutely nailing it in terms of all the disciplines, he wasn't such a team player at that point. So I think, but we all expected him to pass. And when his name got called out, I was absolutely convinced I was coming next. So whenever they went, the rest of you have passed, I just honestly, just pure disbelief. I just couldn't believe it, but excited to see, because obviously your parents then come over for your graduation and things like that. And it was just really exciting thinking, I blooming did it. My God. So it would have been, I'm sure I would have learned a lot from going through basic training a second time, but ultimately all of those little lessons you pick up as you go through the rest of your training anyway.
Of course. And I won't talk about the actual, ceremony and stuff. People who want to know about that can buy your book or listen to your audiobook on Spotify. It's well worth the listen, and we'll touch on the book later on. So your first deployment, was to Iraq, but you also went to the Falklands just beforehand, if I'm not mistaken, which to anyone that's listening and doesn't know, the British military were involved in a 75-day conflict in the 1980s in the Falkland Islands. But obviously now it's more or less a British held territory. And so, what was it like going to the Falklands? Because you would have grown up more or less hearing about all of that on the news as a kid.
Yeah, and ironically, I think, I'd heard of the Falklands was the year I was born. In fact, the Falklands
Mm-hmm.
happened before I was born. It happened in the June that year, and I was born in the
Mm-hmm.
September. So I actually hadn't heard too much about the Falklands campaign. I
Okay.
obviously knew what it was and knew about Margaret Thatcher and things like that. But again, I'd lived in this little bubble in Northern Ireland where pretty much the news every night in Northern Ireland was about Northern Ireland stuff, which
Yeah.
always made me laugh because when you come to England, you never hear anything of the news from Northern Ireland. So I was aware of it, but hadn't got too much in terms of background history on it. But I did know
Mm-hmm.
before I deployed was, and very much, my first couple of months in the squadron before I went, was the squadron or the Falklands was just a party, place. Everyone would go down there. There was a bar, every section had a bar. So the Chinook Force had a bar, the Chinook Air Crew had their own bar, the engineers had one, the Hercules crews that were down there, the fixed wing boys, they had one, the catering section had one, the air traffickers had one, and they were all open on different nights. So you could pretty much do a big massive pub crawl. And then there was a couple of them open the same night, and it was crazy. And everyone used to joke you'd go down there and get fit or fat because you'd either go to the gym all the time or you just eat and drink. And the first
Yep.
time I definitely did the latter and just partied. And because the Chinook that was down there was unserviceable for the first couple of weeks, so we couldn't do any flying. And in fact, it was probably only about the first 10 days, but we were just, and because we're the Chinook crew and we were pretty much the only transport to get around the island because a lot of the island was still mined, so they couldn't
Yep.
drive on a lot of the roads. So we were basically like the big taxi, and people just blagged flights with us all the time. So every time we did arrive at a bar and someone went, "Oh, that's the Chinook crew," everyone would be buying drinks and trying to elbow in for a trip the next day. So it was great. But whenever we did do the flying as well, because it was so varied, it was so diverse. There was, basically because we were the platform that moved everything, every day was different. You get the tasking sheet, and it was like, right, today you're moving fuel bollocks, which are these big, massive circular fuel tanks. The next day you're moving like a BB, which is like a mini ambulance. The next day
Mm-hmm.
you're picking up like a wire cable, a wire stand. It could be anything, and that's what made it really unique because you really had to like learn your trade and think outside the box just to get the task done because there wasn't an option to go, oh, we can't do that. It was like, how are we going to do that? Because we have to get that done.
Yeah.
So a really cool place to go for my first tour.
Wow. That's yeah. Because most people, well, most civilians, I should say, would probably assume Chinook as just an air, like a way to move personnel mainly, and maybe vehicles. But those other items that you mentioned, like you just wouldn't think of that if you're not military, and that's really interesting to hear. And so my next question, tangents off the Falklands to first deployment of Iraq. What was that like for you? Well, both deployments, really.
Yeah, I think the first time I got to Iraq, the biggest thing was the heat. I mean, I couldn't wait to go because again, when you're sat in the crew room back in the UK and every couple of weeks, the bus would pull back up outside the squadron. The guys who'd been over in Iraq would come off the bus and they'd all be tanned and they'd be in their cool desert combats, and I'd be sat there in my like UK combats or my flying suit. And they'd all get off in their cool desert combats with like their sleeves rolled up, looking dead gnarly, and they'd be putting their weapons back in the armory. And then they'd come into the crew room and they'd all have these cool war stories or like just spinning dits about stuff. And I just couldn't wait to go, is the truth. I thought, that's when I really get to like to take the L plates off and go and do what I've trained to do. But the war finding had finished by the time I got there. It was very much just, again, a lots of routine tasking. We were the big bus of operating out of Basra Airport, which was in the south. So the threat level was quite low. But, we put the self-defense on every day. We had to wear a body armor. So it was definitely a step up from any flying we did in the Falklands or in England. But we weren't getting shot at all the time. We'd have an brief before we went flying. So the local intelligence kind of was given to us. But it wasn't anything too scary. I think the scariest thing was the camel spiders. And they were these big spiders that were
Wow.
like the size of your hand. And they like to hide in the shade. So they would hide under the aircraft a lot and under the chocks specifically. So the aircraft chocks. So we would do a
Yep.
walk around and then we'd on start take the chocks out. And very often one of these camel spiders would leap out at you. So that was probably Scariest thing, yeah. Honestly,
Yeah.
there's some really incredible pictures for anyone listening. If you Google camel spiders, there's some really insane pictures of them out there. They
I'll put
literally
up
look
a
like,
photo in the editing stages and I'll blast a very quick flash so people can see what it looks like.
yeah, they're not fun.
Wow. So after the second deployment, obviously, as you just mentioned, there wasn't really much fighting other than with, kicking spiders off the chocks. You get back to the UK, and then Afghanistan is more or less going off at this point, I'm assuming. And you're just itching again, I'm sure, to, ply your trade overseas. When did you find out that you were going to Afghanistan? And again, what was the feeling and then heading over there for your first deployment?
So it started to kind of all bubble around in the background. I remember being in Iraq and kind of everyone was already starting to draw down out of Iraq. So a lot of the equipment was getting sent home, and there was already the sister squadron back in the UK were working up to go. And they were putting a little bit of infrastructure across towards Afghanistan. But I think for me, the two big indicators really that it was going to be like a step up from from Iraq, where that we had in Iraq, we had a weapon fitted to the aircraft called the M60. And the M60 is the weapons they had fitted in the Vietnam War and the Hueys. It's
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
they bungeed them to the side of the Hueys. Really reliable weapon. It's an American weapon and it fires about 100 rounds a minute. It's actually 200 rounds per 2 minutes, but it equates to 100 rounds a minute.
Yeah.
And it's all trusty. And we had that fitted on the ramp and on the side of the Chinook in Iraq. Before we went to Afghanistan, we all had to train up on the minigun, which up
Wow.
until that point, the special
Yeah.
forces Chinook had used them, but we had not touched them. So the fact that we were now training up and fitting those weapons, I thought, and it
That's
fires
a step
3,000
up.
rounds. Yeah, so 3,000 rounds a minute compared to 100 rounds a minute was just like next level. And it's like a lightsaber when you press the triggers are like that big. They're like the size of a 5p pence over here in the UK, your thumbnail. And you press that, there's two of them, and it just unleashes this hail of bullets. But I thought, well, why are we fitting? We're not fitting those for no reason. So that was
Yeah.
kind of the first indicator. And then the course that I had to do before deploying to Afghanistan was the escape and evasion resistance interrogation
Yeah.
course.
Captivity
And that
survival
was
training, wasn't it?
yeah, and that was mandatory. You were not going to deploy to Afghanistan if you hadn't completed that course. So, and again,
And how
I
was that
thought,
course
well,
for
why?
you?
It was the hardest thing I've ever done in the military, definitely. It was a week basically you go on the run as if you've been downed out of a helicopter. So you're just wearing your flying suit and your boots. You don't have a sleeping bag. You don't have a jacket. You've nothing. You're just on the run. And then you get chased by a hunter force and then they catch you. They certainly didn't go easy on me because I was a female. I got the absolute shit kicked out of me. And then you go into and again, I didn't mind that because ultimately it's train hard, fight easy, right? And
That's it.
if we ever did get caught for real, the Taliban aren't going to say, "Oh, let's go easy on her because she's a girl." It's probably going to be the
Yeah.
complete opposite. So
Exactly.
I don't really mind that. And ultimately, I put myself in this position. I want to do this job. I want to be one of the lads and one of the team. So I can't expect special treatment.
Mm.
If I'm gonna walk the walk, talk the talk. I have to do exactly the same as everyone else. Otherwise, you don't have the credibility. Ultimately, I would have spent my entire career thinking, but I got a let out on the A course, so I had to do exactly the same as the rest. And then yeah, you get caught, you get put into interrogation and kind of conditioning where you get locked in cages. They play you white noise, then and stress positions up against the walls and your hands on your head and stuff, and then you do all your interrogations. So had to complete all that. And then I went off to my first Afghanistan deployment. But again, in the early days, I'm sure plenty of people listening to this will have heard of Camp Bastion, but it didn't even
Even I've
exist.
heard of Camp Bastion.
Yeah, it was the biggest British base there, and we basically watched it being built up out of the ground. And I think in the early days, that's really what our day-to-day job was helping move all the kit and all the engineering supplies and building supplies from Kandahar Air Base, which was quite safe. It was quite a safe haven. We had a Pizza Hut there, we had a Burger
Oh,
King, we had a Green
wow.
Bean coffee shop.
Some
You would
comforts of
fly all
home.
day. Yeah, it really was good, decent gym and stuff like that. And then we would every day we would fly across to where Camp Bastion was being built and watch that be built up on the ground. And I think whenever Camp Bastion then started to become a feature, that's when we started to put a lot more British troops in the ground and we kind of started to saturate the Helmand Valley. And it was that point that things started to ramp up really quickly because Well, it
Yep.
stands to reason. You put more people in the mix, more British boots on the ground, more Aussies were there as well. We used to borrow lots of equipment from the Aussie Chinook force. Um, but more boots on the ground, more bullets are going to fly, more IEDs are going to get stood on, and all that kind of stuff. So
More medivacs will
yeah,
be needed, etc.
yeah. So it just went exponentially from about 2006 or seven onwards.
Okay. And then your second deployment, because there was 10. We're not going to go through every single one individually because there was so many. But the
Yeah,
first deployment was more or less set up, for lack of a term. Help setting
yeah.
up Camp Bastion. Was the second deployment chalk and cheese difference? Was it, pardon my language, shit was kicking off at this point? Or was
Yeah.
it still like late stages of setting up and early stages of kicking off?
I think every single time we went, it just kept getting tastier and tastier. I don't
Yep.
remember a specific, oh shit, this one's a really, there was a couple from around kind of summers to the summer season was always fighting season. So the
Yep.
Taliban would kind of go to ground in the winter and they'd basically come out all bells going in the summer. So you can look on the plot. The reason why I've done 10 deployments. So British Army generally will do 6-month deployments. And I think you
Yep.
guys, you're probably infantry soldiers do the
That's very
same.
similar. Yeah.
Whereas aircrew, we will generally only do 3 months away. And the reason for that is so that we can come back to the UK and do all of our emergencies and stuff like that and practice all of that stuff in the UK simulator. So we have to come back every 3 months and do that. So it makes sense
Okay.
just to then hand over to the next squadron. And
Yep.
the way it works, we had 2 squadrons. We had a sister squadron,
And
and
you'd
every
rotate.
squadron, yeah, and every squadron had an A, a B, and a C flight. So you basically, like, my squadron 18A would go out, then 27 Squadron A would go out, then 18B flight. So you would know when your next deployment was coming, and
Gotcha.
it was in the calendar for months ahead. So you'd kind of come back from one Afghanistan and you knew that in 9 months' time at the beginning, you'd be
Yep.
going again. So because you could look in your planner, you could go, oh, great, that's going to be a summer deployment. That one's going to be tasty. And you'd kind of know. But as is always the way, if somebody went sick and you had to dip in and help out with somebody else's debt, if somebody couldn't go or whatever happened, or they were running light on people, you ended up always doing a few more. But the summer ones were always the most kinetic. And I think summer '09 was probably that was the one where I had the most, certainly medivacs and things like that.
Was that the one that you penned the poem that I featured on LinkedIn, or was there a
Yeah.
different one that you
I
had that
think
from?
that was '09 without getting my logbook out. Certainly we had 16 merch outs one day in 2009, and it was like anyone who's old enough listening to remember scenes of MASH, it was like that. We were bringing
MASH
bodies
is my
in.
favorite show of all time, by the way.
Is it? Oh, there you
Yeah.
go. But it was just carnage. There was literally, blood all down the back of the aircraft and on the floor. And we were taking the casualties off and going back out to get more. And they were coming on while there was already blood and things already, like, cannulas ripped open and bits everywhere. And the medics would try their best to clean up the floor while we were going back out to get the next casualty. But there's only so much, some of them were less than 10, 15 minutes flying time. So you'd be like absolutely ripping the wings off the aircraft trying to get to the casualty as quick as possible. And the medics are
Yep.
just absolutely frantically down the back trying to clean everything up and go and get ready to go again. And yeah, it was just every time we pick a casualty up, we would swap a stretcher out and give the guys a fresh stretcher. And it was scary how many times that we would, be dishing out 2 or 3 stretchers off the back while loading bodies on. And
Yeah.
then the next day be called back to the same guys again, because it was sometimes the same places were just getting hammered all the time. And
Yep.
you'd put these guys in at the start of their tour because we would essentially be the bus service as well. So you'd take a cabin full of guys in and you'd drop these guys off and you'd see a bunch of smiley, happy, can't wait to get amongst it, young lads with all their kit, their Bergens on and stuff like that. And they'd be going into these forward operating bases. And within a week or two, you'd be going in and you would just see these like worn out
1,000-mile
guys.
stairs sort
Yeah.
of thing.
You'd literally grown up a year in a day. And it was interesting to see. I often look back even at seeing the guys that we put in for their 6-month term, we'd go and pull them out again, if we happen to be there 6 months later. And it was the same regiment. And they just all look worn out, just,
Yeah.
worn and haggard. And, war can do that to you very much so. And certainly those really kinetic years.
Oh, absolutely. And all of that has got me thinking, what did you do to decompress after you get back from a mission, especially a kinetic one in particular, and you go through the debrief and all that? How did you, decompress and compartmentalize what had just happened? Because obviously you've got to do it all again tomorrow, or for all we know, in an hour's time, depending, sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, certainly that was the difference between Iraq and Afghanistan. So in Iraq, we had a bar called the Camel's
Yep.
Toe Inn, which I love. We could go and have a beer at the end. Like, it only allowed 3 beers. So you could have like 3 warm Strongbows or Stellas or something like that, because they were never particularly cold, even though we had fridges. But you could sit and chill, and things weren't that kinetic in Iraq, but you could still go at the end of a long, tough day or something happened. You could just decompress with your crew. And that's really important, to chat with people who have been there with you on whatever happened. And we didn't have anything like that in Afghanistan. We had a couple of coffee shops in Kambastan. You go and have a coffee with people, but 9 times out of 10, the way I dealt with it would be I'd just go to the gym. So I would literally get back. And whenever you were on MERT, you were on that duty for like 12 hours at a time. In the early
Yeah.
days, it was a week. And then they realized just how much that was taking its toll. So it got reduced to day on. And, I would finish the duty and someone else would obviously take over. And I would just, gym kit on straight to the gym, and I would just run. And I think, I always refer to myself as like the Forrest Gump of Kambastan, because sometimes I was on that treadmill for like 2 hours, but it was just my chance to kind of just empty the bucket a bit and just get ready to fill it up again the next day. And that was definitely a cope mechanism I think I had. I mean, most people, when you're away on deployment, we all call it fat camp for a reason, because you've got nothing else to do but go to the gym if you're not flying. But I got very task focused on running, and I think it's because it was just my way of dealing with stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, physical exertion, you would have been so high on adrenaline, and everything going on from, kinetic combat medivacs, etc., that you have to release that energy somehow. And I think that's, yeah, a very constructive way, was going to the
Yeah.
gym and getting it out. Because I know I would, if I was in that sort of situation and I had all of that built up energy and I didn't expel it, I don't know what I would do. It's
I guess that's
very,
the problem. A lot of people didn't necessarily have and coping mechanisms are good, right? Because they help you cope, the clues in the
yep,
title. But they can also become very dangerous, because they can
yes,
become addictive to the point of self-destruction. And I think that's where mine became so bad that if I didn't run, I mean, we all, like, there's lots of people laugh about if you don't get a day at the gym, they become like an angry bear and they get really agitated because you don't have the
yep,
endorphins in your body. But there's also, if you've got a very strict, almost OCD coping mechanism, and then that is taken away from you, as it obviously came to many years later for me, that's when the wheels fall off the truck very quickly. But, some people can almost, very much for me, I think I got to the point where I was almost running my body into the ground, because I was just running and running and running, and it was my absolute crutch. And I think, coping mechanisms are great if you recognize that that's what it is. And I absolutely
yep.
hadn't at the time. I had not
Gotcha.
really recognized what I was doing.
That's
Yeah.
fair. And in hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Looking back, being like, yeah, that wasn't healthy, but at the time you're in it, you're not really realizing. And so let's go to a bit of a fun sort of memory. Christmas Day 2006. Talk us through that.
Oh God, you're actually jogging my memory now. Is that the one? Was that the one where the Marines were running naked
Yes,
around?
yes, it is. Yes, yes,
Yeah, that was definitely a highlight of my career. So, I mean, the Marines, the British Marines,
yes.
or the
British
Royal
Marines for
Marines,
for context, not the USMC.
they are they are well known for getting naked at every opportunity, or if they're not naked, they're wearing a dress. And I hope there's some of them out there watching this. But yeah, they love to either wear a dress, a woman's dress, or they love to be naked. And that particular Christmas, I was duty driver for the day, and I got stuck behind a squad of Marines who were running in nothing but Santa hats around the boardwalk at Kandahar. And it's very dangerous driving out there, so there's no way I could overtake them. I thought I'll just stay behind them and drive along behind them for about an hour.
Yeah,
But you've got
fair.
to find the good, I think Christmas days out there, I only did two, I think, in the end, but they were actually quite fun, because I think once you'd mentally detached from the UK and you knew that you're not going to be at home, you made the best of your situation. And
Yeah,
I actually put out a post on LinkedIn the other day for Armed Forces Day here in the UK, and I was just saying how Camp Bastion became like very familiar to me. It became like home, because I spent so much time there. And a couple of people are like, but war is hell. And I was like, but you make your surroundings comfortable wherever you are if
I
you know
read
you're going
that
to be there
post
for
earlier
a long
today.
time.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I do. I think, it certainly did become strangely simple life, because all you had to do was eat, sleep, fly, repeat, and then go to the gym if you wanted to. You didn't have to worry about what shopping to get in, because the food was all there for you. You didn't have to worry about managing money because you weren't spending any. You didn't have to worry about picking the kids up from school. It was just a really simple life. And I think for a lot of people, certainly a lot of comments on that thread feel the same. Just once you've mentally, the hardest bit was going to Brize Norton, which is here in the UK, and that's where we fly out from. The days running up to that, where you're packing your kit again and you're putting it all back in your deployment boxes and stuff, and saying goodbye to loved ones and having that last day out in London or whatever with your partner, they were the hard bits. But once you kind of like got on that airplane and left the UK, you kind of suddenly just resolved yourself that you're there, just get on with it for 3 months. And,
Yeah.
certainly unpack. The first thing I always did when I landed and we got to our rooms in our accommodation or in the tent, which was the first couple of points, was all tents, unpack everything and put your bag away. Because once you put your bag away and it's out of sight, you feel like you're established there and you're not like transiting through or anything anymore. Because you don't want to live out of a bag for 3 months. So just make it feel like home, get everything out, hang it all up.
Absolutely. If you're traveling to anywhere for more than a week, whether it's a hotel or not, unpack your bag, put it into a tall boy or a bedside table or something. Absolutely agree with that sentiment.
I still do it now, and I went away with a mate of mine a couple of years ago on holiday, and we arrived, and she lived out of first as I did unpack everything, put it all away, and she lived out of her bag all week, and it was doing my head in because I was like, and it was the same when we came to leave the day we were leaving. I said, "Are you ready?" And she said, "Yeah." And I went, "So you're packed then?" And she went, "Yep." And I looked, and there was just this bomb on the other side of the room, and I had all three of my bags packed neatly on the bed, waiting to go, and it was like her version of packed. And my version of packed were very different. And again, it's probably quite a military thing, but we get quite OCD about that stuff.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I definitely understand that. I can't do messy when I'm traveling. Can't deal with it. Just thinking about it makes my, not a fan. So while you're over in Afghanistan on your tours, you have an encounter. I don't know if it's with him directly or indirectly, Ross Kemp. What was he like?
Yes, good old Ross Kemp. So for anyone who doesn't know who Ross Kemp is, he's kind of like a figure over here in the UK. He was on a very famous program called EastEnders, which I think has got global fame. So I'm sure your listeners will know what EastEnders is. It's basically a soap drama here in the UK. It's been going for years. And he played the hard man in that series. And when he left doing that job as an actor, he started to just become really aligned with the forces and covered a lot of forces kind of documentaries and started to do his own stuff. And he came out to Afghanistan and we flew him into a place called Musakala. And Musakala was like a real hotbed at the time, like contacts every day.
That's the one place I hear a lot about in memoirs is Musakala and Helmand province, mainly.
Yeah, and Musakala was halfway up Helmand and it was just a hotbed. We could spend, as soon as our wheel touched down, we had about 20, 30 seconds before they would be incoming towards us, either rockets, RPGs, mortars. So we would literally touch the ground, the ramp would go down, the guys would just sprint out the back and would lift. And we were taking Ross Kemp in there, and I was on the ramp manning the M60 when we went in. But before that, we'd had a bit of banter down the back because one of my other crewmen had said, you've got to have a bit of banter with him. So write on the sick bag, which one of these twats is Ross Kemp then. So I put it on a sick bag and held it up because it's too noisy down the back to talk. And he started laughing, which is really funny. And then he wrote on a sick bag and said something back to me and then eventually flicked me the bird. I went a bit of a giggle. But when we landed, and I always think, I'm not a massive fan of flying celebrities and stuff out there because we had a lot of people who would almost come out what we call a bit glory hunting. They'd come out, oh, I'm the celebrity and I went to support all the troops and stuff. So we landed and he worked his ass off to get the kit off the back of the aircraft as quick as possible. So when we lifted, I had a lot more respect for him. And we bumped in a couple of days later. We actually brought him back to the base and a couple of my mates went to like a meet and greet that he was doing. I was at the gym doing my usual run. And they mentioned to him about how he met this, or he said to them, oh, one of your crewmen flew me into Musakala the other day. It was a female. And they were like,
was Gloria Stitz.
Yeah. And because my helmet badge had a badge on it called Gloria Stitz, which was a nickname from early on in my military career. We love a good nickname in the military. And I had an American patch that said Norma Knockers. And then I had a British one that said Gloria Stitz. So for anyone who doesn't get it, just keep saying it over and over again and faster and faster.
Oh,
and
it absolutely makes sense. Yep.
Yeah. But Ross Kemp didn't get it. And he kept saying to these guys, well, no, this girl's name was Gloria. And they said, oh, it's Liz. Her name's Liz. And he said, no, her name was Gloria Stitz. I had it on the back of her helmet. And they went, yes, but her name's actually Liz. And he still didn't get the joke.
He just going over it. Yeah. Wow.
No, he's in the book. I don't know if he's ever read the book. It'd be good if he ever does. It'd be nice to hear from him. But, it totally changed my mind, I think, on celebrities, that particular, him as a celebrity that particular day. And he's done a lot to support the forces since. He's very heavily involved in the Royal British Legion and things like that over here.
Absolutely. So we've had some fun stories. Now let's go to some, I wouldn't say awful stories, but they're not so fun. The Kandahar withdrawal in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. I'm probably getting the year wrong. And the subsequent, exiting from the military for you in particular. That entire, from 2014 through to, 2017, 2018. Talk us through, exiting Kandahar to your medical discharge time of Liz.
Yeah. So in terms of this is not when actually Afghanistan fell back to the Taliban.
No, it was many
years earlier, and it was when the Chinook force left Afghanistan, really. And that was about 2020 or 2014, and it was kind of my last deployment. We knew it was coming. We knew that we were leaving. That our last deployment was very much helping close the gym and helping move all of that kit that we'd taken in there back from Bastion to Kandahar, but to then be air bridged out of theatre. So it was a very strange feeling. It was like basically breaking down a summer camp. We built this thing up out of nowhere. It trebled in size. It had a bus route. It had coffee shops. And then it was like starting to switch the lights off as we broke all down. And it was really sad. And it was weird because it felt like such an end of an era. And things had calmed down somewhat. Though certainly that last step wasn't as kinetic. We still had the odd merch out, which was the flying ambulance. But it was seemingly starting to slow down a bit. So it was just the right time. I mean, we couldn't have stayed there forever. And I don't even think at that point I had this question in my head of, did we win? Have we not won? I think everyone was just waiting to see what would happen next. So as we sort of gave our power over to the Afghan army and said, right, you've kind of got control now. It's up to you guys to kind of make this work. But I remember that last lift out of Kandahar and just being so sad. And I ended up, say this tear rolled down my cheek, and I didn't want any of the lads to see, so flicked the old dark visor down. And I feel that everyone was feeling the same. I remember chatting to the guy beside me, he was a good friend of mine. He'd had a kid since our first deployment. He was one of the junior pilots. And, we deployed multiple times throughout the campaign, and he'd become a father in that time. And he showed me a picture of his little lad just as he were lifting, and smiled. And he couldn't wait to get home. And I think everyone was kind of worn out by then. Everyone was ready for the end, but it still felt really sad that it was over, because anyone who has deployed in a theatre like that will tell you that it is the one thing that makes you feel alive, that camaraderie. It's using the analogy, going on summer camp with your mates is a little bit strong, but you're all going away, you build that bond, you go through some real high adrenaline hits, and you come out of every deployment stronger, and I think more rounded as a person with more experience. So when that finishes, it's like the end of a party almost, or something. It was very weird, emotional.
Would you say that, sorry to interrupt, would you say that last time lifting off, to leave, you left a little piece of yourself there?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I always refer to it as the best of times and the worst of times, but it totally shaped me as a person. And we had blast walls out there in Camp Bastion, and I wrote a little poem in the blast wall, which is actually in the book, and just left my little mark in the blast wall. And, all of that I think got whitewashed and got probably crumpled and flat packed. But even the fact that it was on there, it was on a blast wall, and no matter what happened to that blast wall, it was written there, and it was left in Afghanistan. So, and I think everyone who served out there, certainly everyone who went beyond the wire in Camp Bastion, because it was very different wars. And I'm always quite, I'm not taking away from anyone who deployed and didn't get over the wire, because all of those people in the background, the engineers, all the
just as important,
they were just as important. But there were two very different wars. And, those guys who were out in the forward operating bases, living on ration packs, getting shot at every day, never even feeling safe in their own bed space, that was a very different war for them. So, even that post I put up about Camp Bastion feeling like a safe space, there's a couple of guys on there going, it didn't feel safe to me when I was in the forward operating bases. And I completely get that, because we pepper potted into them for a couple of minutes every day, and we saw what was going on. And I think, I definitely, anyone who's served out there will have left a piece of themselves there. So, very much it's woven into my fabric now.
Yeah, wow. That's really insightful. And you're copping some neck pain and some back pain, which is, at the time, very prevalent for helicopter crew, air crew in general. And it came to be such a issue for yourself, by the end of it, it was the main cause, not the entire cause, but the main cause of your medical discharge. At what point did
Yeah.
you start experiencing, just like a little niggle sort of thing, all the way through to, the final weeks of before your discharge? And like
Yeah.
out of 1 to 10, 10 being literal on deathbed sort of pain, and one being could do 20 burpees right now, what sort of pain level was it when it was at the worst for you?
Yeah. So I only started to notice it after my last Afghan debt. And I often say to people, it's amazing what your body can carry when you've got something to do. You see people
Yeah.
running marathons and people doing ultra events, and they carry an eagle and they don't even notice it's there until afterwards, because you've just got to get the job done. And every time you go on holiday, you always get sick on day one, don't you? And it was a little bit like that. I think we came back from Afghan, suddenly that huge purpose and that drive was gone, and you started to listen to the rest of your body. And that's when I first noticed it. And it kind of got worse and worse here in the UK. And that's when I first went to see about it and getting the physios to look at it. And they tried everything. I was grounded a couple of times, and they gave me a lightweight helmet. I did a lot of physio, a lot of rehab. I kind of lied a little bit and went, yeah, okay, it's fine now. I just want to get back to flying. So I managed to get
Yeah.
back flying again. I managed to get back down to the Falklands for my last day. And it was that last deployment in the Falklands where I just woke up one morning and I was like attached to a crucifix. I literally could not move my head or neck in any position. And
Wow.
it was like someone had poured concrete into all of my muscles from the neck up. And I never flew again. That was the last time I ever flew, which
That's kind of a full
ironically,
circle moment, starting in the Falklands
yeah.
and finishing in the Falklands. Sorry, continue.
Well, the irony is, it was my last ever flight on a Chinook. Well, actually, I went to then be a passenger on one later on when a friend died, and we did a repatriation service. But that my last operating flight on a Chinook was down there, and it was on a very famous Chinook called Bravo November. Now, Bravo November is the Chinook that there was 6 Chinooks went to the Falklands War, and only one of them made it back, and the others got sank when the Atlantic conveyor ship got hit and torpedoed, and it sank. Bravo November was on an air test at the time, and it was airborne, so it survived, and it basically
Wow.
was the only Chinook of the entire war. If you're ever bored, look up the story of Bravo November. She's an incredible aircraft. They lost the door. At one point, the crew thought they were ditching, and they jettisoned the door, and then they realized they weren't in the water. They were just above it. So they managed to pull power and survived. But the Chinook had no door for the next 2 months. It was just, this aircraft just was absolutely the heartbeat of that entire war. And I hadn't realized until many years later, where she's now actually retired in a museum here in the UK. And I was invited up for the press day. And none of this is in the book because I only discovered this about a year and a half ago. But
Yep.
I got my logbook out and I looked up how many. I thought I would like to know how many hours I've flown on that particular airframe, because after that we obviously bought more Chinooks. There was a fleet of about
Yep.
20 at a time. But when you flew on Bravo November, you always felt invincible because of what that aircraft could do. It was like
Yeah.
a chariot that had like an
Yeah.
invisible force around it. And anyway, I looked my logbook up, and it turns out my very first Chinook flight ever, which was Famil 06, and it was like my Chinook Famil flight on the Chinook School, was on Bravo November, and my very last flight was on Bravo November in the
So it's
Falklands.
not
Where
only
she
full
did,
circle of going to the Falklands and finishing in the Falklands, it's
yeah,
to the point of Bravo November and finishing on Bravo
yeah.
November. Wow.
So that aircraft bookended my career, and every time I go and visit the museum and stand on her, I just burst out crying. It's like this
Yeah.
weird response, because I just feel like that aircraft was me. She had a tough time. She had a tough paper round. She just kept going, and then now she's retired. She's hung up a flying kit. But yeah, so ultimately, I had my last trip on her. I came back to the UK. I went to Headley Court, which was the Centre of Excellence back here in the UK for all the amputees that we picked up in
Yep.
Afghan. They couldn't fix the neck, and basically what happened, whenever you're wearing a flying helmet and all that body armor and gear, and you're hanging underneath the helicopter, rotating your head around basically like that on the top of your neck, I just crunched all the bones together. So two of the vertebrae
Oh,
had basically just done that.
ow.
And they're sadly irreparably damaged now. They've basically built more bone spurs on top of them. So now
Yeah.
it's manageable. It hurts whenever I go cycling and I look over my right shoulder. So I tend to steer into the middle of the road quite a bit. So I tend to try and bring someone with me for a
Yeah.
bit of a wingman. But other than that, it's pretty manageable. I do a lot of running and lift a lot of weights and stuff now. And it flares up every so often, but I can manage it. But it sadly cost me my career, and I never flew again after that.
That's fair. And you were given the option of, a desk job to finish out your 22 years worth of service, but you were literally like, without flying, I'm nothing, sort of thing,
Yeah.
or was the mentality from what I gleaned from the book. Um, and so, how did that come about? With obviously the medical discharge was, you know, um, by to an extent your choice, because you were like, I'll be damned if I'm going to be behind a desk in my
Yeah.
good blues. Um, and do you sort was that the mentality all the way through your career from the start right through to the finish, or was it because you found out you can't fly or couldn't fly anymore? You were like, well, my job's done, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think I'd never even considered it because I was so fit and healthy, really. And again, I was living the golden era. I was living my best life on the Chinook Force and deploying and deploying. I was going up the promotion ladder. I was a gunnery instructor. I was kind of like adding all the stuff in that you needed to do, and just never saw the road ahead crumbling. And then I think when it did, I'd seen so many other people who had developed injuries and gone over to, what essentially we called the graveyard. You'd go over to
Mhm.
HQ, like you said, you'd have to wear your blues every day. And I think I'd worn my blue uniform, my RAF blues, like 10 times in my entire military career, apart from my like parade uniform. I
Yeah.
just hated wearing them and then I look back now and think, why? Because they made me feel like a girl. It was a skirt. I think there was a trouser option, but the trouser option was the most unflattering thing in the world. So I'd always gone for the skirt, but it suddenly felt different to the lads. Suddenly I was a girl, and I think that's what I loved about wearing a flying suit. I was just one of the gang. So I
Yeah.
flat out refused to wear blues, much to my boss's dismay. He kept coming in every morning and going, Liz, when are you going to wear blues like everyone else in the office? And I said, no, you never get me in them. And it kind of became a running joke for about 4 months. But
Yeah.
and I just wear my combats every day because at least my combats, again, I was just one of the team. But um, yeah, I was over there for a couple of months, and again, the office I had was right next to where the aircraft took off from, and it was just
Oh, that
watching
would
them
giving you
and
FOMO.
yeah, and I'd go back over to squadron a couple of times a week and have a brew with my mates, but it's amazing how quickly you become out of the loop of what's going on, and you're just, you pop over for a visit, and everyone's busy and no one's got time, and I very much felt like an outsider. And that wasn't by anyone's design or intention. It's
No.
just that the treadmill is still set at 20 miles an hour and everyone is still running on that, doing all the flying stuff and planning trips and deploying and exercises. And suddenly you're not part of that anymore. So I just had to pull the pin and go. And I remember at the time thinking that this is, I was only 37, so I still had the potential to have a whole separate life and new career path. And
Yeah.
because I joined so young and it had been my entire dream to spend my whole life doing that job, I thought, well, I need to find the next chapter, which is going to have to start now if I'm going to have a whole career doing something different. And I think a lot of people, when they leave the military, they don't realize that you're not necessarily going to find your next thing straight away.
Yeah.
Most veterans, there is a statistic out there, and it's something like 7 jobs in 2 years or something, or 3 years.
Wow.
But most veterans pepper pot around jobs really like very prolifically after they leave because they're just trying to find, because we're kind of a weird square peg when you leave the military. You're always a bit odd compared to civvies, and you've got to try and find that thing that gives you that purpose again and that reason to serve, I guess, because the seed to serve is in us all. That's why we join, and that doesn't go away when you take the uniform off. So a lot of us need to find that thing again. But
Yep.
I expected it to be there. I expected me to leave the military and then go, oh right, so this is the second life, and that very much didn't happen. I started to really, really struggle very quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, fair. And we'll dabble into that in the next few minutes. But I've got one question before we get stuck into the post service time. And it's part of the book. Now, I know you hate, because you were a woman, you were a girl in the military. I'm not going to ask what was your proudest achievement as a woman, not at all. However, in the final few chapters of the book, you mentioned that by the time your flying part of your career had come to a close, there was like 6 or 7 women in the crew, and one of them in particular was inspired by you to become
Yeah.
an air crewman. How did that feel for yourself? Inspiring the next generation, and I hate to bring it up, of women into the
Yeah.
RAF, particularly air
It was
crew.
it's incredible. And I think, I'd always shied away from being in front of the cameras when the BBC news used to arrive on deployment. They'd be like, oh, can we interview her? You've got a woman.
Yeah, you would have
And
been
my
the
boss,
White Rhino sort of thing.
exactly. And my bosses were really good at shielding me from that. And I was
That's
always
good.
like, no, I do not want to be interviewed. I'm just one of the gang. And I think I think only upon leaving now I realized that I have almost a duty now to kind of tell my story about what I did so I can show young girls that those jobs out there and you can do them. And it's not about singing
Because if they
and
can't,
going,
if they can't see it, they can't do it. They
you can't
can't think
sing.
it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not about some sort of extra trumpet or red carpet for me going, look, I was a woman and I did it. It's not about that. It's about saying, you're a woman and you can do this. And
Yes.
that's very
Exactly.
different. And I think, yeah, I was so proud, Anna and Bex and we had a really great gang and we were such a close sisterhood. And, whoever was doing the postings at the time, so obviously you all arrive on the wing and then people decide which squadrons you go to. They all came to 18 squadron, so we were all in 18 squadron, which was really good. Instead of divvying them out and having half and half, we all ended up on the same squadron, and it was just really great. It was, and because as you go through training from the very start of basic training until you get to a frontline helicopter like the Chinook, there are so many filter points where people who are not suitable for the role, and I'm not suggesting they're weaker in any way, but they're just not the right type of person for that job.
Yeah.
They get weeded out. So actually, by the time you get to a squadron, most people are very like-minded people. They are people that just grit their teeth, roll their sleeves up, and get on with the job. And
Yeah.
we were very lucky in that respect that I'd say most of the Chinook force, 99% at least, were all like that. And certainly all six of the girls, 100% of them were, just get on with it and just, don't ask for any special treatment, just really good lasses. But not particularly tomboyish, just wanted to get on with the job and be treated like the rest of them.
That's awesome. I absolutely love that. And it is awe inspiring. Wow. Literally goosebumps. Wow. So we're going to tangent into the transition into medical discharge and into civvy life because up until you're a civilian in school and then the next time you're a civilian is medical discharge, and that's a lot of years, and that's a very, I can imagine, tough period of adjustment. As you mentioned, some people go through 7 jobs in 2 years, sort of thing. How was the transition for you? Because at the time, alluding to the book as well, you started to experience a bit of a disconnect from your husband at the time, if I'm not mistaken. So talk us through that entire experience, because he also served 22 years in the army and got discharged at around the same time.
Yeah. So he and I basically had met in Iraq, early deployment. He was in the SAS, and we were like rock star couple because he was in the SAS. I shot a big gun. We would
Yep.
deploy for many months of the year, and then we'd manage to get back to the UK at the same time, and we'd live in London. Like we'd go to London for weeks on end and drink champagne, and we were living this very rock star lifestyle, and it was great. And I could knock around with all of his mates down at Hereford and talk the talk because I knew about bullets and guns and things like that,
Yep.
and like all the places we deploy. So we had a really, really great kind of time together. But yeah, we both left the military at the same time. He came to the end of his time. I was obviously going through my medical discharge. And I think we were both really struggling for identity. But what I mean by identity, I think a lot of military people, I thought the uniform defined me, and
Yep.
I've only realized many years later that actually anyone who serves in the blue light services, the military, or any company for your entire career, you think that the uniform defines you. This is me.
Finding
I'm
out who
so and
you
so.
are outside of that.
Yeah. And it's not the case. You define the uniform. They're just uniforms on shelves until you put it on and you
Mm-hmm.
breathe the life, the personality, the banter into that particular role. And I hadn't understood that concept. I very much felt invisible. He was struggling as well. And we started to become really fractious and then started the makings of a divorce. And we'd only been married for 2 years. We were together for 13, but we were only married for 2. So again, I don't think we entered into the marriage thinking it would end so quickly. Nobody would do that, but it would just all came crumbling and falling apart very, very quickly. And I think that's a sign, again, when you are, I guess, institutionalized by the military, you just can't
Yeah.
see how life goes on without it. So I was going through that. I'd found some purpose back in terms of work, and that I was working for a disabled flying charity down the road from Odium, where the Chinooks are based. So I didn't have too much further to go to work every day. It was still flying role, almost not flying in the air, but aviation based. So it was ticking
Yep.
that box. And my job there was to get scholarships for a lot of the injured veterans. So, I was still speaking to lots of military people. And it was funny because our boss at the time used to say he could hear when a military person had come into the office because they flew civilians, children, all the way up to older elderly people, all with disabilities, and they teach them how to fly. And my particular section where all the military people that fell into that category. But he said you could always tell when there's a military person in because we'd sit in the coffee bit, which was like a big open space in the hallway, and just go into like a different language. Because
Yeah.
military people, we were talking like about TLAs is the term, which is three-letter abbreviation. So like FOB is a forward operating base, but we'd be talking about FOB such and
Yeah.
NVGs. And he said he'd sit in his office just typing away and he'd laugh because it was like, oh, Liz is off in her weird voice again. But so very much was really missing that military thing. And every time one of them would come in the door, it was like, even if I'd never met them before, there was this instant grab them and connect with them. And that seemed to be okay up until say lockdown hit. And then when lockdown hit and I didn't have any signs at that point of PTSD. I guess the biggest thing was the biggest indicator for anything was that I just really missed the military and I wouldn't shut up about my
Yeah.
time in Chinooks. I was just like this one time at band camp, but because of the nature of where I worked, people wanted to hear the stories and people were
Yeah.
loving and hanging off them. So I was still able to kind of like relive that in this job. And then when lockdown hit, all of that just stopped overnight.
Yeah. And speaking of lockdown, getting into a very touchy topic that I'm a very not touchy, very sensitive topic. So right now I want to put a disclaimer to anyone that's listening at this point of the recording and of the episode. The next topic does cover suicidal tendencies, suicidal thoughts. So if you or someone you know is going through it, or in general, and you don't want to listen, I will add a chapter to this so that way you can skip ahead to the next point of the episode because it's not for everyone. And I want to respect that. 2020, obviously, world is in absolute turmoil with, in a lockdown. England definitely copped it a lot. Wednesday, the 12th of August, 2020. And the following weeks after in particular. What was that like for you, Liz?
Yeah, so we in the UK went into lockdown in the March. I think
Yep,
you
so
guys
did we.
were a lot later. Oh, were you the same? Right. And in the early lockdown, you were allowed out. You couldn't bubble with anyone. You were completely on your own. And
Yep.
as I already alluded to, I'd gone through this divorce. So I was living on my own in my old apartment. So I felt like I'd already stepped back in time in terms of life progression. I was like, how am I here again? Like all these years later, knocking around in my little apartment. So that was kind of like a moment of defeat almost. But then you were only allowed out for 10 minutes exercise a day. And that was,
Oh,
I think, the biggest.
that was bullshit part of my language.
Yeah, no, it really was. And for someone who'd used running as a coping mechanism, and I did allude to earlier, coping mechanisms are great, very effective until it's suddenly taken away from you. And suddenly my biggest coping mechanism was ripped away from me because it wasn't
Yep.
worth putting my trainers on. So coping mechanism had gone. I'm living on my own in my apartment, so I'm very, very isolated. And I started to develop insomnia because I basically had no routine. Like I wasn't getting up to go for a run every morning. I wasn't going to work. And the insomnia started to really spiral out of control. And, anyone who's had a bad 1 or 2 nights sleep, you know how incredibly fatigued that can make you. But the
Yeah.
compounded effect of that night after night, every time I put my head in the pillow, I was going through like minigun stoppage drills, emergency drills in the aircraft, things I would never need to know again, but I just couldn't clear them out of my head. I use the analogy, it was like a bee was buzzing around in there, or like a pinball had come loose, and I just couldn't sleep. And it was just really, I was then eating more sugar because I was trying to like basically build my energy up every day and have some endorphins, and that wasn't working because that made me feel worse. So I'd go back into the hole the next night because I've jumped,
Hmm.
like literally filled my body with sugar. And it just compounded and compounded. And by the June, I couldn't sleep one night, and I got my logbooks out and I started to Google and look up the soldiers who had died in our aircraft on like basically the airborne ambulance. And
Yep.
that was something that we'd never done during that duty. You don't think about who's in the body bag because that will drive you insane. Just think of it as a very precious piece of freight that you have to get back to Camp Bastion. And
Yep.
very often, that is exactly how we would view it. Just it's like an honor and a privilege to be part of this soldier's last journey off the battlefield, but don't think about who's in there. And there was only
Yeah.
one that ever really got to me, and that was actually a Marine, the first ever kills in action body that I picked up was a guy called Marine Curry. And because Curry was such a distinctive name and it was on his body bag, I remember his name very distinctively. And actually that caught up with me a couple of years later while I was still serving. And I read his story in the Times and kind of just burst out crying one day. And I was like, oh, I picked this guy up. And essentially the same thing was happening now many years later. I was looking them up. And personalizing them all. And I knew that was a really bad, dangerous behavior. And I really should have reached out for help, but I didn't. And I wonder why. And I think it's because us military people never want to burden someone. Burdening someone else with your shit, feels like a sign of weakness. You feel like you're adding to their list of stuff to worry about. So you just brass it out and try and find a way through it and find the solution yourself. But the wheels, I didn't know what was going on mentally because I was just falling apart and my brain was so busy. And I think, again, I look back and think if I'd had some kind of PTSD training during my military
Mm,
time or PTSD awareness training, I might have gone,
mm.
oh, this is what's happening. But I had no idea. I just thought it was me and I was depressed and I just lost my motivation. I was letting myself get fat. I used to run and now I'm not a runner. And it was all coming internally. I was just sticking more knives in myself whilst falling apart. And then it came to a real head in the August in 2020. Basically woke up one morning and I always use the term, I felt like I'd been body snatched by the Grim Reaper. I just woke up that morning and was like, today's the day, and had basically spent the rest of the day planning at length how to end my life that night. I'd had a drug called amitriptyline. I'd been prescribed for my neck injury and I reordered that on repeat prescription. So I
Hold
actually
up.
did reach out to
Sorry,
the GP.
sorry to interrupt, but that day, so the weeks beforehand, the months beforehand, you were, depressed, all that sort of stuff, but you hadn't actually been like, right, today's the day. But just all of a sudden, this one day randomly turned out to be August 12th. You woke
Yeah.
up, right. The book made it out to be as if it was somehow a pure sense of calm about it as well, which is very
Yeah.
unnerving, if I may say, because yeah, you woke up randomly one day on that day, right? Today's the day, and then you Googled, how, or ways to, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of go through it all logically, I had been given a drug called amitriptyline, which is actually prescribed, I think, in Australia as well. It's the most widely prescribed
Mhm.
drug in America. It's very, very widely prescribed here in the UK. And I do motivational talks now. And whenever I do an audience of like a couple hundred people, I always have about 50 people who go, I've been on that. It's very
Yep.
widely prescribed. And it's a drug that's used for sleeping. It's a drug that's used for neck pain and nerve blocker. It's used, I didn't know, but it's also an antidepressant. So I've been prescribed this drug for my neck pain. I was taking it a little bit sporadically as and when it hurt because I've never been one of those people that I'm like, if it's hurting for a reason. You don't need to take painkillers. So just wait until it stops hurting. So I'd never
Mhm.
been one of those people like a pill popper. And having had another night of insomnia, I thought I'm going to take one of these amitriptyline to help me get to sleep because I knew it was a really good sleeping tablet. So I took one on the Monday night, one on the Tuesday. I reordered some online, and it was the Wednesday morning that I woke up and I had these dark, dark thoughts. Now, I hadn't realized at the time that the way antidepressants work is they basically put you in a dip before they pull you out into a better headspace again. So
Yep.
essentially what the amitriptyline had done, unbeknownst to me, it had tiptoed into my brain and it started to amplify all of those negative thoughts. So I was really scared. I actually woke up and had all of these suicidal, harmful thoughts and thought I really need help. So I reached out to my GP by
Oh, that's
email.
good that you've reached
Yeah.
out.
They then emailed me back and said, oh, this is the pharmacy by mistake. You've contacted us by
Yep.
mistake. Contact your GP, which again, I think was another like, oh, they don't really care. They've just palmed me off. So I did contact the GP and I made an appointment. The doc called me that afternoon, and basically at that point I was barely able to get the sentences out. I was inconsolable. And he said, I'm going to prescribe you some antidepressants. But he never asked if I was taking any other medication, which I was, this amitriptyline.
Hmm.
He didn't look at my notes to see that I'd reordered it or asked, do you want to come in and speak to someone? And I lived opposite the surgery. So there was a couple of big failings there on their part. But I remember feeling like you alluded to, like just pure relief when I hung up because I thought, well, that's it. I've asked for help. I've asked for help for the professionals who are meant to be able to catch me, and they don't even care. So no one cares. So I can go ahead with my plan now. And I went across at 4 o'clock. And do you know what? That's so far from the truth. I could have picked up the phone to like my family, my friends, any of my military mates, and somebody would have caught me. But I just had this, my brain was not functioning properly. That's
Yeah.
one of the hangovers of no sleep. Your brain starts to play real mind tricks on you. But the other thing is that when you put a uniform on, whether or not you ever go to war, from the very first day on the parade square, you're taught to stand in front of somebody and they scream in your face and not flinch. So you're already overcoming your fight or flight response. You're then put on a range and you're taught to shoot a weapon and not recoil. And so then, and that's the same with anyone who puts on a uniform. Then amplify that by multiple times going to war. You're constantly overcoming your fight or flight response, which is your reasoned thought. Because reasonable thought would be, there's the lion, I'm going to run that way. Whereas we are taught to run
Go
towards
towards
the
the
lion.
line.
And basically, my reasoned thought had just stopped working completely. So that whole day, all the things I was doing felt very logical. Going across and picking up my lethal dose of drugs at 4 o'clock from the pharmacy, that was logical. Writing a suicide note to my parents, that was a very measured thing to do. And I had no emotion. So I wrote my suicide note. I tidied my apartment. I had dinner, and all of it, I didn't have a single tear.
You even
or
made sure your
emotion.
lizard had enough food for a few days.
Yeah. And I think it's, this drug amitriptylin's a nerve blocker, so my emotions were blocked. But I was robotic in my behavior. I just mentally checked out of life, and there was a mission that had to be completed. And the day basically went like that. And as you said, I was on suicide forums, which is so scary that they even exist. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I didn't. By the way, I didn't know they existed until I listened to your audiobook.
It's
And
really scary.
wow,
There are
yeah,
basically suicide forums out there where people have been on there who have tried to kill themselves and it didn't work. So they put on what they took and basically said, I would recommend you take this amount
yeah.
if
What
you're
they would do differently,
really
yeah.
scary. Really scary, and they need shut down. There was actually a program on them here in the UK last night. I think if I have time in my next life, I will probably, that'll be my next mission, is to try and get those kind of websites shut down. But I basically got to midnight and I sat on the edge of my bed and took 95 of the amitriptyline and don't remember anything else after that. But spoiler for anyone who is logging back on now, I obviously did survive. And yeah, we can go into that if you like as well.
Yeah, because obviously no pun intended, it doesn't end at that attempt. Even if you were to have been successful, because the ramifications and for the family and whatnot, because you would have felt once you did come to, I'm sure, a whole range of emotions and thoughts. And can you talk us through that? When you're coming to with an intubation tube down your throat, to seeing family and friends, for basically the first month or two after.
Yeah, very much. So I took the drugs. I still don't know if I, in my head, remember this or not, but I do think that I remember someone saying, Elizabeth, stay on the phone, don't go to sleep, don't go to sleep. And then I just remember closing my eyes. But I did wake up 2 days later on high dependency unit in Basingstoke Hospital. And as you said, intubated. That is genuinely the worst experience of my life because you essentially feel like you're drowning. You can't swallow, you can't breathe properly.
So like
ironically,
that's worse than the captivity survival training?
100% the worst thing I've ever had. So it turns out basically I had been on life support for 2 days and they've obviously eventually removed the tube and started explaining that my heart was okay. They were worried about my heart, but my heart was seemingly had no long-term damage. And I've been brought in by ambulance on the Wednesday night. And I remember lying there in this bed with this tube down my throat, big wide eyes, as the doctors were telling me this, thinking, who found me? Because I just couldn't remember anything after closing my eyes. I thought maybe a neighbor found me, maybe a friend had found me. I just didn't know. So I then 2 days after that was released from hospital and found my mobile phone back in my apartment where it had been left. And myself and a friend went through the call log, and it turns out that I'd called the Samaritans, which are, I don't know if they're a global thing. I don't know if you guys have them.
They are. They're a thing here. Yep.
Yeah, so they're basically like a crisis helpline. I could call them for 13 seconds, and then just after that, I called 911, which is not the UK emergency number, by the way.
No, it's 999 in the UK, but it would revert to 999 because in Australia the number is 000. But for random side tangent for a second, people who holiday over here from the US press 911 and it automatically diverts to 000. So maybe it's a similar thing over in the UK.
I think it is because we end up dialing 911 a couple of weeks later just to test the system, and it got us through to 999.
Yeah.
So I had called them and I was on the phone, I think it was for like 11 minutes or something. And it's a phone call that I don't remember making, but it was a phone call that saved my life. And I think it proves to us all that there is a will inside us all that will fight for your life when you need it the most. And something subconsciously had made that phone call. I don't know what the Samaritans had said to me, but something subconsciously had made me make that phone call and fight for my life when I needed it the most. So it was that phone call that I ended up with an ambulance coming. And funny, I spoke to the ambulance crew a couple of weeks later to thank them because they were going through hell, obviously, during COVID over here.
Mm.
And I don't think I had realized just how close I came to dying. They had put ECG strips on me on the living room floor and had brought me
Mm.
back a couple of times. I basically arrested in the living room. So
Sheesh.
pretty lucky girl, really. And even when I was still in the hospital before I was released, just having my family arrive at the hospital was just really hard because my little brother was the first one to get there, and he and I are so close. And just seeing the damage that suicide, the ripple effect it has on other people, because he'd gone to Scotland for the weekend for his birthday, basically got off the
Yep.
airplane, and my mum had called him and said, your sister's taken an overdose. And he was only living with me until a week before. So he was just questioning everything the whole way down in the car from Scotland, going, what did I miss? What could I have said?
Mm.
Could I have helped? Why didn't I stay for another week longer? All these big questions that were just on his face when he walked in through the curtain at the hospital. And I think that's something for anyone who's been affected by suicide. You will have those questions. You'll go, what did I miss? What was there a message that I missed, that they said something that was subliminal and I could have picked up on it? But the truth is he could not have done anything. I was dead set on my mission that day, and there's so many questions on the other side of suicide. But for anyone left behind, you just got to, I guess, obviously I was very lucky and I came out the other side of it. I'm so thankful for that. But for anyone who doesn't, they're at peace. And I had such a horrible inner turmoil in terms of demons and noise, and just life was falling apart, that I had it happened the other way around, at least I would have been at peace from that. Obviously, I have been very lucky that I did survive, and I have now found peace through therapy and through talking to people. And I think that's the biggest message for anyone who's struggling listening to this out there, is that do not get to where I got to, because there is an alternative option and it is so much better. And I basically started my therapy about a week after that, with all the Help for Heroes and combat stress charities we've got here in the UK, and basically started to unpick the big ball of spaghetti that was all the stuff that had gone on over the years. And I started to pull at the spaghetti strings and start to unravel it all and line them back up in some kind of fashion, put the files back in my brain that I'd thrown out that day everywhere. And I think most importantly, acknowledge that trauma is sad. And when you see traumatic things, it's okay to cry about them and it's okay to feel emotion about them. You don't run and fall and cut your knee and not expect it to bleed. So why do
Mm.
we as a human race experience trauma and sad things and then not cry? Or when you do cry, the first thing everyone does is apologize for it. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm crying. You've
Oh,
just watched
yeah.
cat get run over, your dog get run over, and people apologize for crying. And it's like, that is your body's response to this event. So let yourself cry. And I think, especially for males, suicide it's one of the biggest killers in males, I think from 35 to 55 and globally. And I think very much from this, from the infancy, when you're little boys, you fall over and the first thing your parents tell you is little boys don't cry, or big boys don't
Yeah.
cry.
Or rub some dirt
Fine.
on it, you'll be fine. That sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas women generally are like picked up and cuddled. Oh, there. Now you're okay. Blah, blah, blah. Let's put a big plaster on it. Boys are told to cry. And I think that has fueled a lot of the maybe mental health issues with men and the stigma around it, many years later, because it's like a subliminal message you're taught from 2 or 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's a lot of unpicking to do. But again, for anyone struggling out there, I promise you this, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. There is a light switch in that dark room. I had just been searching for it and basically gave up. But honestly, there are people out there who will hand you the torch and help you find it. You just have to wait and let them find you and let them help, which is, eventually what happened.
Oh, absolutely. And furthering onto that, just before I go into the final questions, anyone that's just listened to that part of the episode, and either is feeling or thinking similar or is worried about someone, there will be a link to at least 2 organizations in all of the 5 eyes, as I like to call it, as a lot of service people like to call it, which is Australia, Canada, UK, US, New Zealand. There'll be 2 resources linked in the description of this episode for if you or someone you are worried about. Don't hesitate to go and contact those in your respective countries. So thank you for being so candid about that, Liz. My final few questions. We've got two two questions and then some quick fire fun ones to finish it off. So this first question of the final two is, looking back on your military career, what would be your three proudest achievements?
Ooh. Three proudest achievements. I think in terms of military time, I think taking a Chinook into my old school is definitely up there. Like I said at the
Yeah.
very start, my school was a grammar school. When as soon as I was like, I'm joining the RAF, they were like, oh, you're going to waste your life. You're never going to make anything of your life. And then was very lucky about 4 years later, maybe not even. I flew. A crew took us
And that
into
was a big cadet school as well.
yeah. So the cadets, they did all around security, the rugby pitch. We landed right in the middle. The whole school just stopped. Down tools, everyone came out. The primary school from down the road came in and had
Did
like
the school
around
know?
again.
Was it planned and organized, or was it like
Yeah,
a
yeah, it was all
okay,
planned.
okay.
And I think, again, in terms of perception in Northern Ireland, it had had its time with the Troubles. Helicopters were always very much seen as like these enforcers in the sky, these bad things that are looking for bad people. So be able to switch that narrative up even for Northern Ireland to say, look,
Yeah.
we want to showcase forces careers. So that was an incredible moment. And I got to show my mum and dad and my granny and granda around a Chinook. And my granny and granda were never going to be able to make it to England to do that because they were too
Yeah.
old and frail. So to be able to do that was pretty cool. That's up there. I think also, I sort of coordinated the hangar party for my friend Anna whenever she died. And she was,
Yeah.
again, one of the crew girls. There was only ever 6 of us, and she lost her battle to cancer. And one of her dying wishes was to have a big 1940s kind of like hangar party, with like Winston Churchill and all the big
Yeah.
heroes and things like that. Like
And the
a day
trumpet
party.
band, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was one of
I'll be
our kind of
honest.
wishes.
I think I told you this. I went before we started recording. Absolute floods of tears when I was listening to that chapter.
Yeah.
It's very moving, and everyone should definitely listen to the audiobook. It is free on Spotify Premium. So if you can't afford the book physically, please do yourselves a favor and listen to the audiobook version. Sorry, please continue, Liz.
It should come with a free pack of tissues as well, because that
Yes.
chapter is
Yeah.
But if I know, and I've hopefully immortalized Anna in the chapters of my book, but I hope that I've done her justice, because she was an incredible girl, and I said to be able to bring that last dying wish to life was really amazing. But I think the biggest highlight of it all, and ironically, it was also the biggest low, was MERT, Medical Emergency Response Team, to be able to be part of a soldier's last journey off the battlefield and to watch so many soldiers take their last breath, but equally to be brought back to life at our feet. And that was testament to the incredible medics that we had. There were so many positives to come out of it. It'd be very easy to focus on the soldiers that died, but actually the amount that we brought back, who then went on to climb Everest with no legs, who went to row the Atlantic with one leg, who went on to like have kids and bring up their families because what we did down the back of that aircraft was incredible. And at one point in Afghanistan, it was the only place in the world where you could survive a non-survivable injury. And I just think that is a mind-blowing statistic. And it says
Yeah.
everything about, it was weirdly the most dangerous place in the world, but the safest place to get injured
Yes.
because of
Yep.
genetics. And, it was an absolute honor to be part of that. It's probably the thing that gets the most feedback whenever I post about it on any of my social media, and not from military people, but from the British public who appreciated what we were doing out there to kind of bring our troops back.
Yeah, wow. That's incredible. And those are three wonderful highlights. And when we started the recording, you mentioned that you found out about the military and the Air Force, etc., at around 16 years of age. So my final question before we get into quickfire is, looking back on your life as a whole, knowing everything you know now and all of the experiences you've had up to today, what would be three pieces of advice you would give 15-year-old Liz?
Oh, I've been asked this question before, and I remember thinking for ages something really profound. Like, I've got so much good stuff to tell her now from all the lessons I've learned. But the truth is, CJ, I wouldn't tell her a thing because I don't want to spoil the surprise. And I've
I
loved
love that.
every bit of my life. I've loved the good, the bad, the highs and the lows, but I've loved it all because I didn't know what was coming next. And I think,
Yeah.
so often in life you get through so many challenges with like a childlike excitement of like, oh, this is novel. And even the first couple of times being shot at, it was like, oh, that was novel, just being shot
Yeah.
at. Obviously that wears off. But I think, looking back at the A course and things like that, you didn't know what was coming next. And I think for all of us, if you knew what was coming next, it was full of the fun. So
Would
I
you
just
do
wouldn't
it?
tell
Yeah,
her.
exactly.
But I'd absolutely join the military again. I always say if I had a rewind button and go back and do it all again, I'd do it all again. And I genuinely wouldn't change a thing. I think even, I know it's quite a sweeping statement to say, but even the day of the overdose, as much as that's not advice I would give to everyone, I
No,
think there's a line in the book saying, don't try death. I wouldn't
no,
recommend it. But, all jokes aside, that moment of complete breaking is what's remade me on the other side. And I'm
yes,
softer around the edges now. I'm more outwardly aware of PTSD and of other people. And I've used my mess to become my message. And I help other people now going forward. And I would not have that opportunity, that sense of purpose back in life and the identity of Chinook Crew Chick had it not all broken in 2020. So I do believe in fate. I think everything happens for a reason. I also think my guardian angel, Anna was looking over me that night and said, nope, not your time. Get back down
yeah.
there. So a very lucky girl.
I love that statement so much, and it's so you would like thinking of something profound. The most profound thing I've actually heard in years is I'm using my mess to spread a message. Like that is so profound. I can't even begin to unravel that. So yeah, I've got a few, probably three to five quick fire questions. Just fun ones to lighten up the mood for the end of the interview. So, without further ado, first question: what's your favorite movie of all time? I know the answer because of the book, but what's your favorite
Yes.
movie?
Forrest Gump. Is that what I put in the book? I think it's
No, you
Forrest
put
Gump.
Wizard of Oz.
Oh, well, no, that's different. So Wizard of Oz is like my spirit movie, and there's a lot of
Okay,
references to Wizard of Oz. But I think in terms of just pure entertainment, I do love Forrest Gump.
okay,
I learned something
okay,
new
fair.
every time I watch it. But
Okay,
yeah,
that's
there's
totally
some
fair enough.
huge, huge ties to the Wizard of Oz and me. And
Yeah.
there may be another book coming, and there may be even more
Oh,
ties to the Wizard of Oz. So
well, if
yeah,
there is another book, I would absolutely love to have you on again to talk about that book. Um,
yeah.
but all in good time. Next quick fire question: Apple or Android?
Oh, Apple, definitely.
Okay.
I'm a
See,
bit, I'm a
I'm
bit Irish
Apple
when it comes to
device, but
tech.
Windows computer.
Yeah, I'm not very good at either, to be honest. I've just about come
Okay.
across the Spotify. Up until recently, I was still on my iPod Shuffle, and it was like, "There's this
Yeah.
new thing called Spotify."
Oh,
Yeah, don't
that
like
makes me think of a question, and I'll ask it before I continue the quick fire. During your time of deployment, obviously, iPhones and stuff were not really a thing until the back end of it. What was, on your mixtape, on your CD, or on your iPod when you were out on deployment what jam would you absolutely blast?
Oh, I love it. So yeah, it was the old iPods that you used to get on your
Yep, the ones
or
that
we could
clip
even
on, they were like 2 GB. Yep.
yeah. And even when phones were around, we couldn't take them on deployment anyway. So it was
Yeah.
just you just had
Yep.
your little iPod. But I'm a massive kind of rock girl. I love my rock
Yep.
music. So I had a bit of AC/DC, a bit of Led Zeppelin in there, all that kind of stuff, a bit of
A
Bon
bit of
Jovi. But
Fortunate
I also
Son.
yeah, exactly. Clarence Credence Revival. I had all that kind of stuff in there. And I think I also there's a couple of really good Brit bands over here. So there's a band called the Stereophonics, which you guys may have heard of. They're
I've
on
heard
there
of
as
them. Yep.
well. And an Aussie band called Three Doors Down, which I've got a
Yep.
lot of their
I
stuff on there
love
as
Three
well.
Doors Down. Yep.
Yeah, I do too. So I had a lot of their stuff on there too. But I had a right mix of everything because I teach spinning. I'm a spin instructor and I have been for most of my military career. So I used to have literally, you name it, it was on there. Prodigy, it was all on there.
Awesome. I love that. So next quick fire question. How do you like your steak?
I like it absolutely cremated, and there's going to be lots of people switching off now and going, "What?" But
Okay.
yeah, I don't like it bleeding on a plate. Let's put it that way. And I think it's because I've been to so many places around the world where I've ended up with food poisoning. Morocco being one of them. I think that's quite well
Mhm.
documented in the book. But I thought anything that has got an inch of giving me like food poisoning, I'm like, no, cremate the hell out of that thing. Just
Yep.
like make it like roadkill on the plate. So yeah, I like a good old tough steak.
You know what?
Yeah,
I'll absolutely give you that one because I cannot eat a steak that's further cooked than medium rare, but
yeah.
absolutely understand your reasoning behind that. Do you have an alcoholic beverage of choice?
Yes. So, well, I've actually got a few. I am Irish after all. I'm probably the only Irish girl that doesn't like Guinness and whiskey. Can't stand the stuff.
Yep.
But I do like a good cider. I love a nice, good pint of cider, and there's loads of that here in the UK. I don't know if you guys have such a cider culture over in
We have
Australia, but
absolutely. We've got heaps of cider. We've got Summersby, we've got Strongbow, and a lot of other like smaller
yeah.
brewery type ones.
Yeah. So I like cider when I'm out drinking with all the lads because I can't drink beer to save my life. But I'm also like little black dress, heels, and a glass of bubbles girl as well. So I
Fair.
like to be able to have both.
Gotcha. What's your flavor of cider? As in, is there a flavor that you like the most?
As long as it doesn't taste like sweaty sock, I'm happy. There's
Yeah,
a lot of
fair.
ciders here in the UK where there's like things floating in them. And And they've also gone a bit
Like
too far here in the
cloudy
UK.
cider sort of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
not a
also
fan.
some here in the UK that taste like Ribena. They are so sweet. They've just spoiled the fact that it's cider. So I do like it
Yeah.
one that's going to kick you in the teeth a bit. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, yeah, I brewed my own apple, like alcoholic apple cider in the summer just gone, and it was actually all right. It was not cloudy. It was, I mean, it wasn't world beating or anything, but it was definitely would give a can of it to my friends. But this is not about me.
But
This
more
is about yourself.
satisfying. Well, you made it, so it's even more
Yeah.
satisfying. You know, when you're
Oh,
finishing that last drop, you're like, I made this.
oh,
That's cool.
yes. Oh, it was so good. And my final quickfire question. So we've covered movie, we've covered Apple or Android, we've covered steak, even though you like it more than well done. That's okay. Geez, what would be another quickfire question? I
When are
can't
we
really
coming to
think of one.
Oz?
You know what? That's a perfect question. What's next for Liz McConaghy?
What's next? Well, I've got back into running again. So I ran the
Mm-hmm.
London Marathon a couple of months back.
Oh,
It was
wow.
just the best day of my life. If anyone has, if you ever think that you can't run a marathon, you can. I promise you. I did a podcast last year, and it was a guy chopped it up and actually released the clip where I said I'll never run a marathon again. You know, my running days are over. And then fast forward a couple of months, and I ran the London Marathon. It was very funny.
I love that.
But never doubt yourself. You know, just believe in your ability. And if you set your mind to something, you can absolutely do it. So I found running again, which used to be my thing, and I've got my running vibe again. So did the London Marathon. I've got a big ultra marathon in Tunisia in October with Foxy, who you probably know from SAS, who does wins, and a couple of the other big veterans. And who knows? There's a guy in America who's written the script for the book. So just hoping that somebody out there has got Tom Cruise's number, and I can give the script to Tom Cruise and he can create the movie. Answers on a postcard of what we're going to call it. I suggested Gloria, but some people said
love
Top
that.
Gunner. I think Gloria because a couple of people have said Top Gunner. I was like, Top Gunner's too cheesy.
Nah,
But
that's too cheesy, but Gloria is
yeah,
freaking great because anyone who's read the book will absolutely get it.
we'll get it. And then, as I sort of sneakily alluded to earlier, and you're kind of getting the exclusive on this, that I've started
Oh,
writing the second book. And I'm very good. The first book took 3 weeks to write. It basically was just like a brain dump. I never intended
yeah.
anyone. And I think that's why people are warming to it, because I never wrote it with the idea of someone reading it or publishing it. So it's very much written from the heart. It's written as if I'm talking to my granny in the supermarket queue. It's, you know, no agenda in there. It's just my thoughts down on paper to get them out of my head. And I would recommend to anyone, if you're struggling with mental health, just write it down. You don't have to be the best poet or an author. Just get it out of your head and get it onto paper. So yeah. So book number 2 is in the
Okay.
making now. Watch this space.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's really awesome. And listening to the audiobook, which you narrated yourself, which I absolutely love when an author narrates their own book, when it's a autobiography or a memoir, because if you were to hire someone, it's fine, but they don't capture that emotion behind a certain chapter or behind a certain line, which is why I was blubbering mess about the chapter about Anna, because I could
I had to
hear it in your
re-record
voice.
that bit 3
Yeah.
times. That was the third take of that chapter because I just broke
Wow.
down the first 2 times, and I was going to
Yeah.
leave that in, and someone said, "Oh, you're going to make it sure people can understand what's going on." So that was the third iteration, and there's still quite a lot of emotion there.
Yeah, and you just can't get that with a voice actor sort of thing, which I mean they can, but it's I don't know. Maybe because I know there are some veterans who have had their books recorded as audiobooks from other people, and I get that because it can be, such as yourself, very confronting, and you broke down 3 times as you mentioned reading a chapter.
Yeah.
So I understand that, but it's even more powerful as a listener, you know, being able to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, for lack of a better term. So, Liz, I want to thank you very much for joining me on the podcast, telling me and everyone that listens and watches this your story, and can't wait to have you on again in the future.
Yeah, no, it's been an absolute pleasure. And for anyone who's got any questions or whatever, I'm on Instagram as Chinook Crew Check. I'm on Twitter as Chinook Crew Check, or X as it's now called. And obviously I'm on LinkedIn as well. So just look me up and be nice to connect. I think the same with the books available out in Australia. So it'd be good to have some more readers out there.
Wonderful.
Our world is decorated, but obliviously we walk past, and mostly only notice when they are brought to half-mast. In the country I grew up in, there was one for each side. A flag can unite us, but just as easily divide. And then after I joined up, they suddenly meant more. Each time that I saw one, my tears would now pour. The red, white and blue that bled into that cotton. watching 6 of our men carry him, draped in a coffin. Then the bloodiest day for our own British troops, when all in one sitting we lost 5 sets of boots. A mix of football and regiment flags as the stretchers went past. Each soldier tucked under, asleep everlast. Yes, each flag was different, but all the same side. United by the country they fought for and died. I imagine that triangle handed over with sorrow to the family of each soldier who gave his tomorrow. And I watch from the ramp as they stand and dwell, then touch for the last time their brothers who fell. A poem by Gloria Stitz.